Welcome to Fortress on a Hill. I'm Henry.
I'm Danny.
I'm Kagan.
We're three leftist veterans that aim to expose the reality of the U.S. military's multiple wars abroad and to illuminate the damage military service does to Americans.
American presidents throughout U.S. history have used American military and diplomatic power to force regime change of democratically elected governments around the world.
Most veterans come from families vested in prior service, and American generals choose their own, ensuring diversity of thought never interferes with American warmongering.
How can we stand by and do nothing while our military kills and destroys lives the world over, while telling Americans that all this death and destruction protects them from terrorists when nothing could be more false?
Fortress on a Hill aims to change that.
Well, all right, we're back. We are back with another great guest. We sure have been on a roll, haven't we? It's kind of incredible every week that we get such a variety of guests, and everything from former military to longtime war correspondents to today the self-described or Nina Turner's described minister of ice cream, Ben Cohen, who is so much more than that. I think most folks probably know Ben. He probably has more name recognition than almost anybody else we've had, up to and including Colin Powell's chief of staff, and that says something, because I don't imagine there are a lot of other business leaders where that's true. And if it is true, they're usually sociopaths who are sort of masters of the universe. So, Ben is an American businessman, activist, and philanthropist, and of course, co-founder of the ice cream company Ben & Jerry's. I'll go into a little bit more on his background, but I think something that's kind of interesting is personal connections. And what's interesting is, how he and I met. It was kind of surreal. I got an email. Ben, I don't even remember how long ago it was, but maybe 3 years ago or something. I'm still in the Army. I'm struggling through Fort Leavenworth, just hating my new assignment, ready to just wishing that I could somehow get out. And I get an email, short, to the point. I like your writing. I'd like to talk more, see what we can do together. Signed, Ben Cohen, parentheses, of Ben & Jerry's or something like that. And I read it, and I was writing a lot, but I wasn't getting any particular traction. I just was kind of yelling in the wind, still in the Army. And I was skeptical. I was like, this is not Ben from Ben & Jerry's. There's no chance that I would get that email. So I showed my then wife, we still laugh about it. We're friends. And I said, this can't be real. And she says, listen, I don't know, that his assistant is CC'd and she has an at Ben & Jerry's email. So what do you have to lose? So I fired back. We talked on the phone, and kind of things went from there. And we met in New York, and I've hung out in Vermont and just had a great relationship. So I guess the moral of the story is anything could happen, and you have nothing to lose. Take it seriously. So that was pretty cool, and it's been my absolute kind of surreal pleasure. So Ben, thanks for that email, or we wouldn't be having this conversation, certainly.
Well, it's great to be here with you in the fortress, Danny.
In the fortress, right. The fortress on a hill, rather than the city on a hill. It's an interesting play on things, and I have to credit Henry with that, my longtime co-host. So, all right, so I'll just get through the embarrassing stuff and the bio, and Ben's probably so sick of hearing it, he's probably going to mute us on Lake Champlain, where he is right now, if you can hear, which I think is awesome in terms of authenticity. Ben is associated with Vermont in the common imagination, but actually he's born in Brooklyn and then raised in Long Island, in Merrick, Long Island, which maybe we'll talk about. It's got kind of its own interesting and sordid racial history for this moment. And while he was there, he met and befriended his future business partner, Jerry Greenfield, in 7th grade in gym class in 1963. So I'm clearly dating Ben here a little bit. And, the next kind of portion of his life has always interested me, even before we met. Over the next decade, he pursues his interest in pottery. He mixes his kind of further education, Skidmore, the University Without Walls, the New School, NYU, but also a variety of working class jobs. And this interests me because, the right-wing oligarchs and pundits, I'm talking the Bill O'Reillys with their worship of Levittown, they kind of worship the bootstraps myth, which in many cases is a myth, but Ben kind of lived it. He had gigs as, I'm sure I'm not getting them all here, Ben, but a McDonald's cashier, a Pinkerton guard, deliverer of pottery wheels, mop boy at a few places, including Friendly's, assistant superintendent, ER clerk, taxi driver, and then eventually a craft teacher at a private school for emotionally disturbed adolescents upstate in New York. And, so while he was at the Highland Community School, that's when he sort of was really experimenting with ice cream. So, of course, at that point, 1977, Ben and Jerry, with their, gym class scheme from years before, decided to go into business and open up Ben and Jerry's homemade ice cream parlor in Burlington, Vermont. And there the shop became kind of a hit in the very cool, I can attest, I finally got there about a year and a half ago, University Town. It's really a cool spot. And so Ben and Jerry's blows up, everyone knows, nationwide business, one of the largest companies in the USA for ice cream. And, the key there is that then, Ben and Jerry, they turn like the newfound wealth and prominence into like a variety of social causes. So this is the Ben and Jerry's Foundation, which is a lot of the pre-tax profits go into that. And but Ben is working on so many other things. So we'll talk about some of them. True Majority, Business Leaders for Sensible Priorities. He's been involved with the project on government oversight. And in 2012, in response to the stealing of elections, legally by the court and Citizens United, he's been working on this stampede, stamping money out of politics. And most recently, he was national co-chair of the Bernie Sanders campaign. Anyway, finally, I ramble on, but he's also, and I feel compelled to say it, a genuinely warm and wonderful man, and dare I say, has become kind of a rather surreal mentor and friend. So, Ben, now that I've sufficiently embarrassed both of us, just thanks again for coming on.
It's great to be here, Danny. It's great to be here with you and working
Absolutely.
together.
You've been at it longer than I have.
Make our country a more just place to be.
Associated with that you've become. So, getting down the quote business, I'll open up with the first sort of question in our, sort of chill conversation. A lot of things have happened because of our initial relationship, and things have just kind of spiraled in a million directions. But the other day, I was on the Drop the Mics live feed with Nina Turner, the senator, spokesman, surrogate for Bernie Sanders, just become this huge national figure, and I'm a huge super fan. And she called you during our thing. She called you the Minister of Ice Cream. And it was funny, and I've heard that kind of language, and I've also heard you jokingly sort of refer to yourself as the ice cream guy, or joke that who knows if this or that prominent figure would want to hear from the ice cream guy, and it is funny, and in one sense I guess it's strictly true, because you did co-found this super successful franchise with all this notoriety and logo, concept, name recognition, but at the same time, not everyone, but I think a lot of folks, even some political lay people, know that, you also co-chaired the Bernie campaign. Plenty of people associate you with what I think is a pretty unique for corporate leaders flavor of sort of lifelong progressive activism. And we're not talking about just a big charity or big single cause foundations, but everything from local, ground game, national and foreign policy work, the whole deal, gritty stuff sometimes. So while I won't force you to impart your life story, though you're welcome to if you are as verbose as I, why has that always been such an important aspect of your professional and personal life? And what were some of the early, issues or events that got you motivated in the first place?
I was kind of a serious, nerdy, fat kid growing up. And, in school, in public school, you hear these wonderful things about our country, about America, that it's a place of fairness and equality and justice. I mean, lately I've been really thinking about the Pledge of Allegiance that we all said every day in public school, and it ends with the words "and justice for all." And I was I don't know, inspired by the idea of that's what this country is about. And and then you grow up and you find out that it's never really been about justice for all. It's been about justice for essentially people who have enough money and people that are the right color, and originally people that were males. And I remember when I grew up on Long Island, sometimes my family would drive into Manhattan to, I don't know, go to a museum or a show. And the route that we took into Manhattan led us off on this street, 125th Street, which was kind of the border between, the upper class area of Manhattan on one side and Harlem on the other side, which was at that time, a place that was full of buildings that were broken down and crumbling, and garbage on the streets, and people suffering and living in poverty. And it just didn't seem right to me. It didn't make sense that here's this incredible wealth on one side of this imaginary line, and on the other side is this incredible poverty. And that never sat right with me. And I think as Ben and Jerry's became well known, and as the media would get in touch with me, reporters calling up saying, we want to interview you about this or that, or different organizations, colleges, business organizations would say, we want you to come and speak with us. I decided to use that platform to talk about what I really cared about, which was justice. And I guess, you're talking about being verbose. I'm just kind of running on here, but also when I was growing up, it was during the time of the Cold War between the U.S. and the former Soviet Union. I kept on having this image of, these two countries that have, this huge pile of shiny, brand new weapons kind of facing each other. And behind those weapons were people that were living in poverty on both sides, people who could not get their basic human needs met in terms of food, clothing, housing. And, that never made sense to me. The people of the United States didn't have anything against the people of the Soviet Union and vice versa. So I don't know. I've tried to, use whatever, notoriety I've got to try to, try to shift national budget priorities, and trying to get people to understand the huge amount of money that we spend every year, supposedly to defend ourselves from, from some kind of boogeyman enemy out there, the enemy of the day, either the Soviet Union or terrorism or China or I don't know who else, Iran, Iraq, Afghanistan, I mean, North Korea, Cuba, it's just absurd. I mean, it's not about defending our country. It's about invading and dominating other countries. So I don't know. That's what. Does that answer your question there, Danny?
Yeah. Oh, of course. No, I mean, I've always been interested, and we've only loosely talked about it, and I think people are probably interested, and I'm sure you've said it a lot of times before, but I mean, I do think that what you're saying is striking, because it sounds so natural to you, and yet that empathy, that sort of natural inclination to see fellowship even with enemies, right, quote unquote, or with the poor, and Harlem, and I, being in Staten Island, I had sort of a similar experience as you in terms of, straddling those worlds and viewing it. And I mean, I still remember there was a movie, I believe, and you're probably old enough to know, I'm just an old soul, but it was called like Across 110th Street, and it was all about the mob and Black and Italian and all this. But there were these real definitive boundaries, in New York, especially in the 70s, 80s, 90s, before the big crime drop. And so I mean, but it's rare. And then of course, I'm going to ask you about it a little more later. But then you got rich. I mean, you had a mop, right? For real, like you were really wielding a mop, and then next thing you know, you really did become a rich guy, and yet that didn't end, right? I mean, that's strange. I'm sure you ran in circles at that point where not everyone responded to wealth the way you did, right?
Yeah, I think one of the differences for Jerry and myself is that we never really planned on becoming business people. He was trying to become a doctor and couldn't get into medical school, and I was trying to become a potter, and nobody would buy my pottery. And and then so we couldn't make a living, we couldn't get jobs, and we felt like maybe our only chance of success is to start a little homemade ice cream shop. And that was all we ever planned on being. We never really planned on being anything more than this one homemade ice cream shop at an old gas station in Burlington, Vermont. And so, and when we opened up that one shop, we said, we want to run our business in a way that the regular, everyday man or woman on the street would like to see a business run. That we didn't approach it from the point of view of, I think most people who go into business, they go into business because they want to make a lot of money, and they go to business school to do that. And that was not our motivation. And so but what we were inspired to do was to run a business the way regular everyday people would like to see a business run. And we ended up realizing that business is nothing more than a well-to-do neighbor in a community, and that it needs to take part in the community, that it needs to give back to the community, to return to the community, not just suck labor and the infrastructure out of the community. And we, as the business got bigger, our first reaction was that we were becoming just another cog in the corporate machine that oppresses a lot of people, that despoils the environment, that exploits its employees, and we didn't want any part of that. And our first reaction was to sell the business. And then I ran into this old eccentric restaurateur that I had come to know because I was the ice cream delivery guy. I was delivering ice cream to his little restaurant. And I told him we were planning on selling the business. And he said, "Man, how could you possibly do that? How could you do that? The business is your baby, and it's just starting to develop, and it's got such incredible potential ahead of it." And I said, "Maurice, you know what business does. It exploits its employees, exploits the environment, and is part of this economic machine that oppresses a lot of people." And he said, "Ben, if there's something you don't like about business, why don't you just do it different?" That had never occurred to me before. And we ended up deciding to keep the business and, kind of do this experiment to see if it was possible that business could be used to repair society instead of to kind of destroy society. To see if it was possible that business was really just a neutral tool like a hammer, and that you could either use it to tear things down or you can use it to build things up. And so that was the path that we embarked on, sometime in the 1980s. And it's been an amazing journey. We've certainly learned a whole lot. We've tried a lot of different things. Some of it's worked, some of it hasn't. In terms of what we've been able to do to improve the quality of life for people in the various communities that we're part of. And it's much the same way that the process of, ice cream flavor innovation goes. Most flavors that we try to develop never make it out of the lab because, they don't really work out. and then a lot of the flavors that we develop, they go onto the market, and for one reason or another, people don't really like them that much and they get discontinued. But there's some of them that you experiment with and they work and people love it, like chocolate chip cookie dough. And so we do that same kind of innovation process with our social mission at Ben & Jerry's. And now that I'm really not that involved in the company, I do it on my own in the other projects that I'm personally involved in.
Well, there's so much there that I could follow up on, and I'm going to go against all instinct and proclivity and let Henry jump into his kind of first follow on or first question, and then I'm definitely going to want to circle back to some of that. So that thank you so much.
Let's hear it, Henry.
All right. I'd like to turn now to discussing my favorite politician. Indeed, I'm comfortable saying the favorite politician of the podcast, Bernie Sanders. We've been Bernie fans since we started the podcast, and even did an episode earlier this year where we thoroughly examined his history with the national security state. But you have been a Bernie fan since he was mayor of Burlington, where you still live today, and then much more recently a co-chair of his campaign alongside such progressive stalwarts as Nina Turner and Congressman Ro Khanna, among others. Could you give us a little glimpse into actually knowing Bernie? What is he like as a real person that you don't just see in YouTube footage? And what do you think should be the next step for the progressive movement following in Bernie's footsteps?
I think Bernie is a true believer and an innovator and a fighter for justice. And he first came to my attention when he was running for mayor of Burlington in the 1980s. Close to when Ben & Jerry's was first starting, and I just couldn't believe and was so amazed and inspired that here was a guy running for public office, talking about meeting people's basic human needs, talking about working for to turn our country and the state of Vermont and the city of Burlington into one that genuinely worked to meet the needs of regular everyday people instead of the needs of corporations and big donors to political parties. And I had never come across a politician like that in my life, and therefore I was not really very active politically. And having this guy run, I mean, he was such a long shot. Nobody thought he had a prayer. He was running against a long-term incumbent Democratic machine mayor, Gordon Paquette, who was in bed with the community, with the business community, ran the city for the benefit of the business community and wealthy people. And, and here's this guy, Bernie, coming in saying, I'm a socialist, and I believe that we should take care of the older people in our community that are barely getting by. I believe we should take care of our students. I believe, and he was saying this even at that time, way, way back then, that our country should provide universal health care for everybody, and that our country should not be going around invading other countries. At the time, the country we were invading was Nicaragua. And it was a real education for me. I mean, I didn't even know the country was invading Nicaragua. Coming to get to know Bernie a little, I mean, he is, he's a serious guy, but he's also got a really good sense of humor. And, he has talked in all his campaigns about how he's never going to take any money from businesses or wealthy people. I mean, all of his campaigns from the very, very beginning were funded by individual small donors. So he's been so clear. I mean, you think about the way politics has been done and covered in our country, and it's all about the personality of the person. It's all about what are they wearing, what did they have for breakfast, what about their dog, and Bernie has been adamant that he will not run a campaign that is not based solely on issues. That's all he wants to talk about. That's all he thinks that people. That's why people should or should not vote for a candidate. Is not about how good does he smile, but what does that candidate stand for? What are the issues? And so he's continued to do that. I mean, I'd always thought that when you use the word socialist, a lot of people in our country conflate that word with communist, and they also understand the traditional meaning of that term in one sense, which is, government ownership of the means of production. And, that's certainly not what Bernie believes. But he's a socialist in the same way that Social Security is a socialist program. In the same way that other democracies that are capitalists, and Bernie, I think he's a social capitalist. I think that would be a much better description of the guy. Most politicians are corporate capitalists. Run the corporation, run the society for the benefit of corporations. And Bernie is saying, let's run the society for the benefit of the community as a whole. Which seems to make a lot more sense to me, unless you happen to be, a really wealthy person who thinks that, should be run for your benefit.
Yeah, it's really interesting the way you sort of break down the misunderstanding of the word socialist and where Bernie fits in. And well, you probably know, because anybody who's ever seen any of my social media or attire knows that I'm like a Eugene Debs fanatic, and plaster his courtroom quote, about the underclass and being in it and all that everywhere I go. And then it was only years later, embarrassingly so, that I realized that, Bernie had worked on a documentary about Eugene Debs way back in the day. I want to say even before you moved to Burlington, right? I mean, that just to me is so indicative of the kind of person he is, and the fact that he could become a national figure despite that, and all the things that opens him up to is really striking.
Yeah. He charted a new path in politics. I mean, before Bernie, it was not possible to run a presidential campaign unless you took big bucks from corporations and ultra wealthy people. And, when he ran his first presidential campaign in 2016, I told him, I don't think it's possible for you to raise enough money, if you're only going to take small donations from everyday regular people. And, and then I came to understand that Bernie knew that if there weren't enough people in the country that were willing to donate small amounts of money to his campaign, that when he finally got elected, there would not be enough of a grassroots army of supporters to help him pass the legislation that he wanted to do. So, for him, if he couldn't raise the money from small donations from individuals, kind of a democratic way of doing it, as opposed to autocratic, he didn't want any part of it. He was happy to lose if there weren't enough regular everyday people that were willing to donate to him.
The guys and I love doing the podcast. Being able to share our experiences in the military with allies and supporters means the world to us. But we can't do all the work. We need you to share an episode of ours with someone, anyone whom you might think could be affected by it. A young person looking to join the military, or possibly parents advocating for a kid joining the military, conscientious citizens who care about the violence the U.S. wages in their name, advocates for women and people of color who understand the harsh environment the military creates for minorities and inflicts on those same minorities across the globe, and anyone else you think might be affected by it. Please take a moment, share this with them. Now, our podcast is supported in a few different ways. First, there's Patreon, where we're blessed to have an array of wonderful supporters helping the guys and I pay for some of the podcast's expenses. Those who contribute $10 a month or more will be mentioned right here as an honorary producer of the podcast, helping keep you, our listeners, stocked with new episodes. But you don't have to contribute $10 a month to help us. For as little as $1 a month, you can help keep us going, paying for hosting and storage fees, transcribing old and new episodes, promoting and expanding the podcast, and more I'm sure I can't think of at the moment. So let's bring out these honorary producers, and they are Will Arens, Fahim Shirazi, James O'Barr, Adam Bellows, Eric Phillips, Paul Appel, Julie Dupree, Thomas Benson, Emma P., Janet Hansen, Lawrence Taylor, and the Status Quo podcast. Your contributions are wonderfully helpful to us. Thank you so much. However, if Patreon isn't your style, you can contribute directly to us through PayPal at paypal.me/Fortress on a Hill. Or please check out our store on Spreadshirt.com for some great Fortress merch. And do understand that if you can't afford to contribute to us, that doesn't bother us at all. This is a hard time for everybody, and we just want to make sure that what we share gets to as many people as possible. And now, let's get back to the podcast.
Yeah, and so that's kind of an interesting segue to my next question about big money and business leaders and where they fit in. But as an aside, but I think a very important one, what you're bringing up is that he really has transformed the way campaigns are done, because now even the right, even the more conservative candidates or even the more establishment candidates at least have to act or play by his new rules. They have to tout their small donations, and it's like everyone has learned from Bernie Sanders, even the corporate oligarch parties. I mean, it's really fascinating in a way.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it's really interesting that you see politicians like Trump or XYZ, mainstream politicians trying to get people to donate $1 so that they could then make the statement that their average donation is low, so that the $1 ones would kind of balance out the $50,000.
Absolutely. Well, so and then you mentioned how you told him that you weren't sure initially in 2016 or 2015 when he was thinking of running whether he could do it, and you mentioned how the former mayor and just about every politician at the national level was in the in the tank for the business leaders. And so again, not to completely just fawn over you, but you're different in a way than some of those business leaders, and I imagine you can correct me if I'm wrong when when I get through my question, but I imagine there aren't a ton of super wealthy, we're talking wealthier than you, right? The ones that make you look poor and the super billionaire class. I can't imagine that there were a whole lot of them actively backing Bernie, which is interesting. You sent me and I can edit it if you don't want it. You sent me a funny, but I thought instructive offhand quip in an email a couple of weeks back. And I hope you don't mind me sharing, but this was right after I returned from the About Face Veterans for Peace direct action in Tulsa. We had a bunch of people arrested, and you said something to the effect of, I've been thinking about, maybe finding, something important to get arrested about too lately. And I just love that, because it wasn't braggy, and it wasn't too serious or too unserious. And I read it, even if a lot of people wouldn't know, knowing full well that you have been arrested before. And this just isn't something that I think we can say, or we're going to see anytime soon from, say, Jeff Bezos, or certainly not the surviving Koch brother, and heck, not even the great, touted philanthropist Bill Gates. And of course, beyond that, you and Jerry are also highly savvy and successful businessmen, even if that wasn't the plan, and even if there was a lot of fits and starts. as you mentioned. But even there, in the socially conscious naming conventions that have become so famous for the ice cream flavors, some of which have really stuck in the vernacular, frankly, as like cultural touchstones, there was always this, like we talked about earlier, linkage between the business and the social justice peace component that's kind of always infused the model. So I guess what I'm driving at is, without expecting you to pretend to speak for the business community writ large by any stretch, I mean, what do you see, and you talked a little bit about it earlier, but what do you see personally or aspirationally for others as like the responsibility and role of the wealthy entrepreneur class in any basically capitalist society? You know, like what's the value or limits of that social consciousness that you're kind of a small part of? And I guess to just complicate it further, how does that play into whether, you know, someone like Bernie has major, you know, corporate backers?
Well, I think that traditionally, what business would say to the society is that it's not possible for us to make a profit and help to meet social needs and solve social problems at the same time. And they would say it's not possible for us as business people to take social or political stands, to advocate for particular laws, and we've all grown up in a world and in a society that says, well, you deal with your financial needs, you know, in one area in the world of business, and you deal with your spiritual needs in another area in church or temple or mosque, and you deal with your social needs in another area, you know, by donating some money or some time to some nonprofit organization. And essentially what Ben and Jerry's says is that, you know, most people believe that there's a spiritual aspect to our lives as individuals. You know, that's kind of what the Bible is about. You know, as you give, you receive. As you help others, you are helped in return. And as your business supports the community supports your business. That's what Ben and Jerry's started realizing, that, you know, yeah, there's a spiritual aspect to the lives of individuals, but when those individuals get together in the form of a business, there's still a spiritual aspect to their group life, to that business, and that I don't know, it just kind of stands to reason. Why should we, as employees, as owners, you know, leave our values at the door when we enter the world of business? Why should business be valueless? Why should it care about nothing except for increasing profitability? And you know, the traditional business model is, you know, pretty much me first, screw you. It's the only purpose of my business is to improve, you know, increase profitability. If that means that, you know, I have a negative effect on the environment, so be it. If that means that I mistreat my employees and pay them a starvation wage, so be it. I don't know. I mean, if that means that my business has a negative impact on my community, if that means that I don't use my voice, which is the voice of business is an incredibly powerful voice, so be it. So all we're saying is that business, as the most powerful force in society, needs to be concerned about more than just its own narrow self-interest. And, business is the most powerful force in our nation's government. All the lobbyists, I would say 99% of the lobbyists on Capitol Hill are paid for by business. They represent the interests of business. There happens to be 10,000 lobbyists on Capitol Hill. And they're all there trying to influence legislation in the narrow self-interest of business without a concern for society as a whole. Business spends about $3 billion a year on lobbying in D.C. And the thing about it is that they do it covertly. They do it in a way that, generally you don't hear about it. They don't like to advertise it. They don't go out there taking out full-page ads saying, yes, we employ an army of lobbyists in order to, influence legislation so that it benefits our business and screws the environment and destroys your health. But that is what they're doing. And the difference is that Ben and Jerry's realized that business is a very political animal. And we kind of said that, well, we're going to be political, but we're going to take overt stands, not in our own self-interest, but in the interest of the community as a whole. And all the accountants, all the lawyers, business consultants, are all telling us that, you're crazy. You can't do this stuff. And, it's going to kill your business. It's going to destroy your business. There's no legitimate purpose to business except maximizing profit. And we did it. We said, well, we're going to try. I mean, we understood that the chances were we're going to fail, but we didn't fail. We succeeded. And the reality is that as the company has taken more and more political stands in favor of justice, economic justice, social justice, racial justice, environmental justice, the company has sold more and more ice cream and made more and more money. So, I don't know if you can prove it that, one causes the other, but I can definitely tell you that after, is that we've been doing both. And, most people's, all I know is we keep on selling more and more ice cream. We keep on taking more and more social and political stands, and sales keep on going up.
Yeah, it's always difficult to tie the linkage, causation and correlation, but man, I can't think of any business besides Ben and Jerry's that has such a well-known reputation. It's so linked, the consciousness and the activism with the business. So,
well, and the thing about it is that it generates an incredibly loyal consumer base. Mostly companies are trying to get customers to feel good about them by coming up with cute, funny, or sexy TV ads, and hiring PR companies and advertising companies to essentially make up stories that sound nice. And those things work ephemerally. They work for a while, until, the cute ad that you came up with kind of fades away. But the difference is that when you build your relationship with your customers based on shared values, that's such an incredibly powerful, strong bond that it doesn't fade away when some other company comes up with a cute ad. It's solid. So I don't know. It's if my advice to other companies is to do more of it. And the interesting thing is that just recently, after the the horrible murders of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and so many, too numerous to mention, businesses have come out and made major statements about dismantling racial injustice. And so that's, that's a step. It's a beautiful step to see. And, now we need to, everybody needs to hold those companies' feet to the fire and make sure that they actually do something to back up those statements. And I want to say that, Ben & Jerry's certainly has a long way to go before it becomes the racially diverse company that it needs to be. But we're on that path, and I hope the public will hold Ben & Jerry's feet to the fire, and and just make sure that they walk the talk.
Well, great minds must think alike, because Henry, I'm sure you want to build on that, Henry. Henry, actually, the very next question was going to ask a little bit about that, so I'll turn it to you, Henry.
So, corporations, I've noticed in this time period, have been kind of quick to tacitly support Black Lives Matter, but in a generally kind of a shiny PR way without any real substance. And you mentioned it a little bit, but if you could expand on your own personal response and feelings to the police killings. You mentioned George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, just to, like you said, just to name a few, because there are so many, Trayvon Martin, Eric Gardner, etc. What have you seen and felt these last few weeks, and have you observed any of the larger corporations' collective response to the protests, and what do you think about that?
I think that for a lot of companies, their hearts are in the right place, and they're making very important statements right now. And I think that one of the things that companies need to do is to diversify their employees, diversify their high-level executives, diversify their boards of directors, and also diversify their supplier bases to make sure that African Americans are getting a fair shake. But the other thing that, and so those tasks, involving hiring and promotions and vendor relationships, that's a lot of hard work, and it's going to take some amount of time, and each company needs to figure out how they're going to do it in a way that works for that particular company. But what every one of those companies needs to do, including Ben & Jerry's, is to make a public commitment that includes a timeline, that includes measurable objectives for when and how they're going to accomplish those tasks. And then the public and the media needs to keep track of it and hold them accountable to it. Not allow the normal human tendency of stuff to slip and fritter away. And the other thing that businesses need to do is they need to recognize that they are the most powerful element in our society, and that they need to use their power to change our laws of our nation and of our states, so that they are more just. I mean, every time an unarmed black person gets murdered by a police officer, people are outraged, and then I don't know, he runs half of it, find out, well, the prosecutor decided not to prosecute those police, and then sometimes every once in a while, they get prosecuted, and then you find out half a year, 2 years later, they didn't get convicted. They kind of got off scot-free. And so I think that the big question on people's minds is, how do those cops get away with murder? And the reason why they get away with murder is because of a series of Supreme Court rulings that have come to be called qualified immunity. And essentially what it means is that it's virtually impossible for somebody whose constitutional rights have been violated by a policeman, like by getting killed or by getting beaten or having their property destroyed. It's virtually impossible for them to sue that police officer. Legal experts, legal scholars talk about this qualified immunity as a situation of heads I win, tails you lose. That, if you get into the details of the law, it says that, well, you cannot prosecute a policeman for violating someone's civil rights unless there has been a precedent of the exact same situation, which has been sustained by the courts. And, the problem is there's never the exact same situation. And so it's a catch-22. We can't create a precedent because there hasn't been a precedent. So anyhow, overturning qualified immunity is key to making justice real. And business people can make their voices heard on that. And if business decided to use its power in D.C., all those 10,000 lobbyists and that $3 billion a year to overturn qualified immunity, it would be overturned tomorrow. So, Jerry and I and the Players Coalition have put together letters. There's a letter that came from 1,400 professional sports players calling on Congress to overturn qualified immunity. Jerry and I have put together a letter of over 400 business people that are demanding that Congress overturn qualified immunity. And that's what needs to be done. That's what we need to work to make happen.
Absolutely. As I've been studying more and more about qualified immunity, it seems more ridiculous. Not only does there have to be a precedent, but that precedent has to exist within the court district or area that it took place. So that means that if there are cases from New York City, they can affect people in Los Angeles and vice versa. And that seems like such a horrible miscarriage of justice.
Exactly. And, our country is a work in progress. And it's up to us to overturn unjust laws like that.
Absolutely. And it's so true how things could change tomorrow if the right people who really have the power did something about it. And of course they don't, largely because they don't perceive it as in their interests. Of course, ultimately it might be in a way. So for the sake of trying to do our best to hold to our promised timeline, and so that you can enjoy actually enjoy the lake and some much needed downtime in these nutty moments. We're going to just briefly kind of end with the forthcoming project that you and I and some other folks like Ed Edstrom have been working on, this Eisenhower Media Institute. So I'm going to let Henry handle most of it, but just as kind of an intro, because full disclosure, obviously I'm going to be very much a part of it. The Eisenhower Media Network I think, just first of all, the name is super interesting, as it sort of takes aim at the military-industrial complex and Eisenhower's speeches, not just the farewell address where he names it, but the Cross of Iron speech about this many schools could be built with just one aircraft carrier, et cetera. But we're envisioning sort of these retired, fairly senior military officers, perhaps intelligence senior officials on a wide political spectrum, willing to challenge the forever wars, the military-industrial complex, or both. So Henry will dig into the details. But, as an intro, this isn't your first foray into forming, backing, or envisioning, the worth of a group of senior, current, or former power insiders, not just military. So I'm thinking of, your relationship or support of the Project on Government Oversight. And I don't remember the exact name, but your previous group of, I think, responsible business leaders for sanity. I think I'm kind of adding that at the end there, but something of that sort, and you can build on it. But so as sort of a prologue to the Eisenhower Media Network that Henry's going to ask you one final question about, maybe you can just tell us a bit more about those two projects or similar ones that I'm missing, and more importantly, just what you think the worth is of trying to gather senior, powerful people for these sorts of projects in your past work.
Yeah, I spent quite amount of time and effort on an organization called Business Leaders for Sensible Priorities. And that organization had a board of military advisors, retired high-level flag officers. And essentially, this was a group of business people that were using their expertise in terms of budgeting and dealing with big numbers, and having those business people come out and say, we've looked at these numbers. I mean, these are numbers in the hundreds of billions of dollars, numbers that the average person can't conceive of. I mean, I can't conceive of it. I mean, I started getting a vague understanding of it once, Ben and Jerry's became a several $100 million company, and I realized, well, 3 times 300 million, that's $1 billion. And so I started getting a vague understanding of it. But, today's Pentagon budget is $740 billion a year, every year. It's an unfathomable number. And so the idea of Business Leaders for Sensible Priorities was to have this group of business people that deal in hundreds of millions and billions of dollars to look at the federal budget and essentially say, hey, we're way overspending on military and way underspending on education, healthcare, housing, poverty reduction. And we had, we had this board of military advisors that vouched for the idea that, yes, it's true that we're spending way more on the Pentagon budget than is justifiable.
So Ben, digging a little more into the idea of the network itself, which I think is just an amazing idea to get people like Danny with crucial views on the military-industrial complex for coverage and exposure. I myself have had vivid daydreams of Danny or Lawrence Wilkerson or Matt Ho giving modern MSNBC pundits the business end of their anti-war experience, but knowing that generally speaking, these voices can't get traction in mainstream media, especially if they don't toe the current administration's line on war and regime change. Could you tell us a bit about what you specifically envision for this media organization, the kind of qualifications for the officers that you would want to have, and how will this organization be a very different animal from traditional ones that try to push continuation of the American empire?
This organization is looking to help military experts that have a contrary point of view, that are not just parroting the Pentagon's line, to get their voices heard. And it's using fairly sophisticated and well-known methods of booking experts on TV, radio, getting them into the mainstream press. I mean, it's essentially a lot of hard work, a lot of pounding the pavement, and just kind of hammering away at the gatekeepers that control whose voices get heard. We'll also be using social media, of course, but the goal is to get it into more mainstream media, and it's just kind of pounding at it day after day, kind of having dedicated resources and dedicated people focused on that task.
And I'm really obviously personally excited about the project, and you and I have you've been working on this kind of stuff for a long time, but you and I have discussed this probably since we first met, in broad strokes, like how can we do this? And there's enormous challenges to it. And I'm sure that we're going to work through them, and it's going to be a process, but it's remarkable then that the minister of ice cream and a mid-range combat officer who has become an outspoken voice are the ones to do it. I mean, it's actually a little sad, right? It's great that we're in it together, but it's strange because you would think that several such entities would exist. And I think the fact that they don't, and that, as we both know, it is difficult to recruit or find generals willing to speak out. There's no Smedley Butlers today, and so there's that challenge. And then also just the fact that it's not happening elsewhere and no one else is trying tells us that that maybe we're inherently right in a certain sense about the broader critique of the system, that it is built to avoid dissent, especially at the senior levels, and it sort of reinforces company man sort of falling in line. And I don't know, that's striking, and I'm sure is something that even before we started this individual project that you've run into in the past.
It gets to kind of the definition of patriotism. And I think the traditional definition of patriotism is kind of blind obedience to whatever the leaders of the country happen to be saying. But I think the real definition of patriotism is standing up for justice, standing up for those highfalutin words in the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. Making the sacrifices that are needed and to be critical, to criticize our country when it's going down the wrong path. Blind obedience. I mean, I think that's what you had in Hitler's Germany. I mean, all those people, I guess you'd have to call them patriotic in the normal sense of the word.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so, we're going to let you go, and we've been incredibly disciplined, which is not like us, Ben. As you know, from our video conference calls, I can go on, and I'm sure we could. But I like what you ended with there. I think that the Nazi and World War II analogies get like wildly overused, but sometimes they're apt. And I think yours was, my country, right or wrong. That whole slogan that was really big in the Vietnam War. I'm sure you sort of remember that. That does lead to the good Germans, right? Quote unquote. I mean, who's to say which country has God on their side? And I think that the way that you framed patriotism just now, and then more importantly through your actions, right, which you would never overblow and you would never overemphasize, but you really have lived your values. And that's what has always attracted me to you before we met, and makes me so happy for us both, me and Henry, to have you on the pod, and then just to be linked with you as a colleague. It's been my pleasure, like one of the great ones in my life. So with that, I'll stop gushing and just thank you one last time, Ben, and let you kind of close it out.
Well, it's great to be working together, Danny, and I'm looking for bigger and better. We're onward, forward.
That's right.
We will prevail. We will accomplish.
Yes, we will.
We will make our country what it was always set out to be.
We're on Twitter at Fortress on a Hill, and also at Facebook.com at Fortress on a Hill. You can find our main blog page and our full collection of episodes at www.fortressonahill.com. iTunes, Stitcher, Google Podcasts, Patreon, Spotify. You name it, almost anywhere you listen, we're already waiting for you. And hey, we're always in the market for more Patreon supporters. Please consider becoming a patron at patreon.com. And if you're not into giving us a monthly payment, think about giving us a couple bucks on PayPal. The link is in the show notes. Skepticism is one's best armor. Never forget it. We'll see you next time.
And listen to my song. I hope you'll pay attention. I will not